Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Jim Curson was taken by surprise when a haggard-looking man walked into his office. With long, graying hair and a thick beard, he was wearing dirty sweatpants with several holes in them, a Harley-Davidson t-shirt, and his skin, every visible part, even his neck, was covered with numerous faded tattoos. This man was clearly not the typical customer Jim had encountered in his 12 years as a senior loan manager at a bank branch. The man smelled strongly of cigarettes and sweat, which made Jim think he might be homeless. Jim was already reaching for the phone to call security when he suddenly felt a strange sense that the man's face was familiar to him. "Rory, is that you?" The man smiled and nodded. Jimmy, a lot of time has passed. You look great. Not a day over 30. Jim wished he could say the same. He had known Rory Dell since middle school. They were in the same class and played on the same sports teams over the years. Jim was small and fast, while Rory was tall and fearless. In high school, Rory was popular with girls who were sure he would go on to a professional sports career, either in hockey or football. Everything changed in the 12th grade, though, when Rory suffered a knee injury while skiing, burying any hopes of a career as an athlete. After that, Rory switched to his other hobbies, car repair and drinking. Jim kept in touch with Rory after leaving school and was even his best man at his wedding to Tricka Lucas 19 years ago. But later, their paths diverged. Rory partied too much, and Jim, now a married man and looking to start a career after college, realized he needed to become more responsible. It had been 17 years since Jim had last been in contact with Rory, although he had heard rumors. "Wow, Rory, it's been a long time since we've seen each other," Jim said, shaking his old friend's hand. "More than 15 years, actually. 17 years and 10 months, to be exact. But who's counting?" Rory grinned, showing yellowed teeth that clearly needed a visit to the dentist. "Oh yeah, it's been so long." "So, how are you?" Jim asked. "To be honest, my life's gone to hell," Rory shrugged. "Do you remember how I loved drinking and smoking?" "Of course," Jim replied. "You left me soon after you started experimenting with illegal substances and everything that came to hand." Rory must have read something on Jim's face because he shook his head and smiled. "Don't blame yourself. You did the right thing by staying away from me. That experimentation turned into addiction. I lost my job, my girlfriend, and almost killed myself. I got off the pills, but drinking was a different story. You probably heard about my problems with the law. I was caught driving drunk several times, crashed my truck, and almost killed myself 10 years ago. But that didn't stop me. Everything changed when I ran a red light, completely drunk, and rammed a minivan. After that, I stopped drinking. Well, also because I spent 8 years in prison for the murder of a mother and her little daughter." Jim's jaw dropped. He had heard rumors that Rory had gone to prison for murder, and now he knew it was true. Jim didn't know what to say and began to worry why Rory had come to him after all these years. "I'm not asking for money or pity, if that's what you're worried about." Rory waved his hand. "I've been clean for 8 years now, except for coffee and cigarettes. I have an apartment and a job. Nothing special. I work in sewage, that's why I dress like this. It's the kind of job where you wash up after your shift, not before it like you. I've been walking past this place on my way to work every morning for about 2 weeks now, and it took me that long to work up the strength to come here." Rory's eyes sparkled with tears. Jim took a deep breath. He sympathized with his old friend, but the phrase, "you dug your own grave," was spinning in his head. While it was nice to know Rory had managed to overcome his addiction, it didn't make the situation any less awkward. "When I went to prison, I found my way back to church and started a 12-step program to cleanse myself. Are you familiar with it?" Jim nodded. "Like Alcoholics Anonymous?" "Exactly. And these steps often go 3 forward, 2 back. The 8th step, if I remember correctly, was 6 years ago. This was one of the hardest. You have to make a list of everyone you've offended because of your addiction. You were on that list. And the 9th step is to ask for forgiveness and try to make amends, unless it would harm them or others. You're the last one on this list who's still alive that I haven't talked to. I suffered and wrestled with this in my head many times, afraid to tell you. I consulted with sponsors and a psychologist. I'm sorry. but what I'm about to tell you may hurt you emotionally. However, people much smarter than you and I assured me that this was the right decision. Jim felt an unpleasant ache in his stomach. What are you talking about, Rory? A tear rolled down Rory's cheek, and he looked completely devastated. He frowned and shook his head. Jim, one of the last parties we both went to, Jeff Sanders' New Year's party, as I'm sure you remember, I brought illegal substances. There were a bunch of people in Jeff's van. They went there to drink, maybe indulge a little, and then go back to the party. I know you didn't take anything that night. You just got drunk until you passed out, but Rory sighed and shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. Jeff and we had a night with your wife that night. Jim's stomach turned. He was in complete shock. Jeff Sanders had been the best man at his wedding, and he and his wife, Lillian, were still best friends with Jim and Tricia. Their children were best friends, about the same age, and had gone to the same school since kindergarten. Jim's daughter, Maeve, was going to college with Jeff's daughter, Patience, and sharing an apartment with her. We were in some serious trouble, Rory continued, and Jeff started flirting with Tricia. He kind of winked at me, and I just joined in. The next morning, I felt terrible. I knew how much she meant to you, and you'd just gotten married. I think that's why I started avoiding you, just like you avoided me after that. I heard that you're still together and have children. I don't know if you're still in touch with Sanders, but you should know. I'm so sorry. It was terrible, and it never would have happened if your wife and I had been sober. I really hope you can forgive me someday. That's it. I'm sorry for the pain this news will bring to you and your family. Goodbye, Jimmy. With that, Rory stood up and walked out, leaving Jim completely confused. Jim's first reaction was that this was a mistake. He remembered that night. It was their first New Year's as a married couple, and Tricia had really had too much to drink. He remembered how sick she was, throwing up several times in the taxi on the way home, and spending the next day in bed. Soon after, they both decided to give up all recreational substances. However, nothing from all the years of marriage gave Jim any reason to doubt his wife's fidelity. When she organized the surprise for his 40th birthday, she had looked so guilty hiding the preparations that he couldn't imagine her hiding something so serious. And Jeff, if there was anyone Jim would take a bullet for and believed would do the same for him, it was Jeff Sanders. He worked as a school counselor at the school where their children now attended and was highly respected in the community. Not the kind of person who would cheat, especially since Lillian and Jeff were already living together at the time. However, Jim had to admit that he knew about the existence of the party bus and that Tricia and Jeff had gone there to drink on at least one occasion. Jim wasn't sure if they had gone there together again, but it was a possibility. For the rest of the morning, Jim was in a state of tense internal struggle. At first, he was furious with his wife and Jeff. Then, he felt like a complete fool because he couldn't believe that Rory's words were true. But if this had happened, it was a long time ago. Tricia was only 19 then. On the other hand, if Tricia and Jeff had been intimate once, they had plenty of opportunities over the years to continue seeing each other behind his back. His whole happy family life could be fake just 4 months before they became empty nesters when Maeve left for college. Typically, Jim and his wife texted frequently during the workday. Tricia, who worked as the HR director at a local brewery, always found time to flirt over text. She sent Jim 3 messages that morning, but he didn't respond to any of them until the 3rd one came through. "Are you busy?" Jim replied, "Yes." Jim usually dined with colleagues at one of the nearby restaurants or pubs, but today, he didn't want to be around people. A hurricane of thoughts raged in Jim's head, so he simply grabbed a sandwich from the deli across the street and ate it alone in his office. He had no idea what to do next. It seemed like every possible choice was a losing proposition. If he confronted Tricia, she would either confess or she wouldn't. If she confessed, he might not be able to stay with her. If she didn't confess, he might not believe her, or she might become so offended by the accusation that she'd get angry. If he ignored it, the unknown would torment him from the inside. At about 1:30, Jim finally thought of something he could do. Jeff's wife, Lillian, was a nurse, and Jim knew she was working the evening shift that week. This meant she was home alone and had probably just woken up. Jim texted Lillian, "Hi Lil, sorry if I woke you up. If you're free, I need to talk to you somewhere private and confidential." Her response came 10 minutes later. "Hi Jim, Just got out of the shower. What kind of party are we planning? Are you working today? I can meet you at Gracchi's in half an hour, if that's convenient. Gracchi's was a small diner near the bank. Jim finished working on one of his cases and told his secretary, Sherry, that he was taking the rest of the day off. He also asked her that if Trisha called, she should say he was in a meeting. Sherry knew Trisha, but not very well. Her gloomy face and nod let him know she would do as he asked, though it was clear she didn't like it. When Jim entered the diner, Lillian greeted him with a wide smile and an energetic wave. As Jim approached, he couldn't help but think what a fool Jeff would be to cheat on her. Lillian was a tall, leggy brunette in denim shorts and a tank top. Jim loved his wife very much and still considered her one of the prettiest women he knew, but Lillian, she was one of those women who was so beautiful, it seemed unreal. Even though Jeff had always been the guy that all the girls had their eyes on, Lillian still seemed too much for him. When they first started dating, she was a model who appeared in catalogs and walked in local fashion shows to pay for her studies. Her perfect face, with high cheekbones and full lips, looked like she could still work as a model. Through it all, Lillian was one of the kindest women Jim had ever known, with a big heart and a willingness to always help others. With a wife like that, how could Jeff even think about cheating? So, Jimmy, what's the secret plan? Lillian said with a smirk, but her expression immediately changed when she saw his face. Oh God, what happened? Jim didn't answer immediately. He ordered coffee and took a few sips before speaking. Lillian, do you remember the New Year's party at your house after Trisha and I got married? Lillian's eyes opened wide and her face tensed. You knew? Jim said, and at that moment, it seemed to him that his whole world had collapsed. But you don't, she replied in a quiet voice, though her eyes showed anger. I'm sorry. I should have known. They lied to me, Jim muttered. Lillian's voice was low and heavy with emotion. In fact, this was one of the reasons why I still married Jeff, despite his infidelity. If Jim could forgive Trisha, why couldn't I forgive Jeff? Jim struggled to stay composed. I should have known, Lillian continued. You and Trisha looked like nothing had happened, like everything was normal. Lillian, tell me, how did you know? Jim insisted, trying to maintain his composure. Lillian sighed and shrugged. At the end of the party, I found Trisha in the upstairs bathroom. She was trying to put herself in order, but it was obvious that she had just had a night. Since you were newlyweds, I just assumed that you found a place to retreat in the house and had some fun. I didn't think much of it. Hell, you wouldn't be the only couple to do that. The party was pretty wild, and I thought Jeff and I were the only ones who didn't have an intim that night. So, I helped her take off her dress and get herself in order. She was so drunk, she couldn't have done it on her own. I dressed her again to make her look decent and left her in the bathroom to finish up. When I came back downstairs, I think I even winked, hinting that you were having a great time. When everyone left, I found Jeff in bed, half without anything and unconscious. I was so exhausted that I fell on the other side of the bed and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up with a wild headache and a huge desire for intimate. Knowing that everyone around me had fun that night, I decided to wake Jeff up with pleasure. But as soon as I started, I smelled another woman. I woke him up and didn't let go until he admitted what I suspected. He said he slept with Trisha in the garage, but it happened quickly. I was furious and wanted to tell you right away, but he begged me not to. He swore that Trisha would tell you everything that same day. That day, he said that she confessed and that you were angry but ready to forgive everything. I spoke to Trisha the next week, and she said the same thing. I'm surprised you haven't noticed how things have been strained between Trisha and me for quite some time. We were friendly, but not close friends for several years until I finally forgave her. That's why I didn't choose her as my witness at the wedding. In the end, I accepted it as a mistake that neither of them would have made sober. I accepted it, but on one condition. Jim couldn't believe how deep this story went. Lillian smiled uncertainly. At first, I said that you and I should sleep together to even things out. Trisha said she already suggested it, but you disagreed and said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. I respected this and didn't insist. So instead, I slept with the hospital intern, a tall black guy with a British accent. He was a selfish guy, but he knew a lot about what he was doing. Well, you know, after that, Jeff and I went to couples counseling on my initiative because he really didn't want me to cheat on him, even though he was unfaithful himself. He was even a little embarrassed by it, considering that he himself is a consultant. So, we didn't tell anyone, but it helped me restore trust in him and improve my relationship with Trisha. I still can't believe you didn't know about all this. Jim took a deep breath, clutching his coffee mug so tightly that his arm began to ache. Lillian, when you work shifts and I have to travel for business, do you think there is a possibility that... Jim, I'll stop you right now. Lillian held out her hand, stopping him. Honestly, I'm really angry at both of them for lying to me about telling you about this, but I'm quite sure that this was an isolated incident. Believe me, it took 10 years before I truly began to trust my husband. I watched him. I made others watch him, and I watched carefully when the possibility of a repeat situation arose. I know you're mad right now, but the truth is that it was just a momentary mistake in the heat of the moment, in our garage, and it was over before they even realized what they were doing. Both were very remorseful for this, and although it was wrong to hide it, I know that Trisha loves you more than anything in the world. She lied to save your marriage, considering how you two have always been the model happy couple. Maybe this is for the best, and you should just forget about it. By the way, how did you find out? Lillian asked. Jim closed his eyes and laughed. It was a nervous laugh brought on by pure despair. He understood that he would either laugh or scream. Lillian looked completely confused by his reaction. When he stopped, Jim said, "Remember our old school friend, Rory?" Lillian frowned. Addicted? This idiot left such a mess in our house at that party that I refused to clean up after him. Everyone else who was there and having fun at least tried to clean up the mess, but this loser didn't. It was disgusting. It was probably Monica. Her eyes suddenly changed, and Jim realized that now she, too, had learned something new. Well, he's currently in a 12-step program, and he came to me to repent and ask for forgiveness, Jim said coldly. He told me all about how he and your husband took turns having a night with my wife. From the way he described it, it wasn't just casual intim. It wasn't just a quick mistake. Lillian's face turned pale, and she looked absolutely shocked. I didn't know that. That man, I could have contracted an intimacy-transmitted disease, AIDS, anything from that addict. Well, judging by how everyone is happy, it was probably better to keep it a secret, Jim said sarcastically. Lillian touched his arm carefully. Jim, no matter what, this happened a long time ago. Hell, we were practically kids back then. Trisha was only 19 and very drunk. I'm still sure she didn't mean it. Don't do anything stupid. Calm down and give her a chance to explain everything. For the record, if I had known then, I would have slept with you without hesitation. Then probably I would have filed for divorce. Jim said with a disdainful grin, if the offer's still valid, we can go somewhere now. You're not serious. You know very well that I would never do this with Jeff or Trisha, Lillian replied, frowning. But is it okay for them to do this to me? You found yourself a lover, a handsome black man. So why am I the only one who doesn't have fun on the side? Jim brushed the spoon onto the floor and stood up. Tell your idiot husband that the next time I see him, I'll break his perfect nose. We're not friends anymore, and I'm starting to realize we never were. Jim, if you want to stay with someone who would do something like that behind his best friend's back, especially when he has you, fine. But if you are not ready to help me take revenge, stay out of my life. I'm sorry, I don't believe that you didn't realize I didn't know anything. You're too smart. You were just in denial and wanted to keep your handsome trophy husband. Goodbye. Jim rushed out of the diner and headed to the car, where he saw 7 missed messages from Trisha. He got into the car and drove off, not knowing where he was going. After an hour of wandering, he found himself in a more dangerous part of the city that he didn't know. He spotted a dingy bar with a sign advertising a late-night show and thought, why not? The inside of the bar looked better than the outside. Clean, well-furnished, with a darkened stage that had a pole set up on it, surrounded by empty tables and chairs. Opposite the stage was a well-lit bar counter lined with empty bar stools. Behind the counter stood a very attractive blonde in a black corset. She was short, about 165 centimeters, slender, with a beautiful face, full lips, and blue eyes. She had a lot of tattoos, which Jim usually didn't like, but they seemed to highlight her toned shoulders and arms, making her even prettier to him. There were just a few older men in the bar, drinking and playing video slots. Sorry, girls dance only on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. The kitchen is also closed. Not many customers today, said the girl, who looked no older than 20 but spoke in a deep, hoarse voice that reminded Jim of Scarlett Johansson. Do you have any whiskey? Jim asked sarcastically. The bartender smiled. We always have whiskey. Choose any table, but if you sit at the counter, I can serve you faster. There are no waiters today either. Great plan, Jim said, sitting down and ordering a whiskey on the rocks. After his fifth drink, he looked at his phone and saw messages and calls from his wife and daughter, as well as one from Lillian. He chuckled and turned off the phone. Another one, Jim? The bartender asked cheerfully. Do I need to ask? Jim replied. Keep pouring, Sonia, Jim said, tapping the glass. Taking another sip, he gestured toward the stage. Sonia, are you performing on stage by any chance? Sonia covered her face with her hand in feigned shock. Jim, if I didn't know better, I'd think you wanted to see my breasts. I saw them, shouted one of the old men at the slot machines. Less than mine. Not like Candy. Candy has breasts that are worth looking at, he said, showing with his hands a distance of about 30 centimeters from his chest. You, Melvin? At least my real ones, Sonia answered, winking at Jim. And to answer your question, no, I don't dance. My father owns this place, and I've been running it since he retired. Jim smiled and nodded. So Melvin is lying? No, Sonia answered with a wink. He actually saw my breasts, and he didn't complain. The old men laughed. Can I ask how this happened? Jim asked. Sonia shrugged. This is a club where girls dance without clothes and waitresses are topless. If I like someone, sometimes I can show them my breasts, depending on the mood. And how can I lift this very mood for you? Jim asked, trying to flirt. Sonia leaned forward, giving Jim a clear view. Sure, she was probably a size A or B, but considering the amount of whiskey in his system, they looked attractive. Let's do it this way, Jim. You tell me what's going on with your marriage, and I'll tell you how guys can cheer me up. To hell with my marriage. It's already over. I'd rather talk about you, Jim muttered. Sonia leaned even closer and whispered in his ear, no talk about marriage. Jim snorted in displeasure, took another sip, and began to tell Sonia everything, including the conversation with Lillian and how it ended. Sonia listened to him silently, then left and returned with a cup of coffee. What the hell? Jim frowned, looking at the coffee. It's me who makes sure you're sober when you deal with this, Sonia answered. No coffee, no breasts. Drink your damn coffee. So we can see them too, another old man shouted as Melvin laughed. You, Larry? All you'll see is my shoe when I throw you both out the door at closing, Sonia shouted. Jim took a disgruntled sip of his coffee, then went to the toilet. He wasn't very drunk yet, but he felt like he'd had enough to not worry anymore. When he returned, his glass of whiskey had disappeared, leaving only a cup of coffee and a muffin. Eat. You need some food. Then we'll talk, Sonia said, pointing to her chest. Why do I feel like I'm being manipulated? Jim grumbled, taking a bite of his homemade blueberry muffin and sipping his coffee. Because you are, but I'll still show you my breasts if you play by the rules. I promise, Sonia said with a wink. Okay. Although I'm young, I've seen everything in my life and talked to a variety of people with experience. You learn to read people and learn a lot from their stories. And I'll tell you, well, you love your wife, and you don't want your marriage to end. Jim shrugged and nodded. Yes, but she ruined everything. Nonsense. She made a terrible mistake many years ago, and you never suspected because all this time your life was wonderful. I bet you anything your intimate life was great, even after all these years, right? Jim shrugged again. I think so, but she just has a high night appetite. That's why I'm not sure it was the only time. Has it occurred to you that maybe part of the reason everything was so good is because she felt guilty about that night all along and did everything she could to make up for it? Sonia looked at him defiantly. Jim rolled his eyes. Nonsense. Sonia bit her lip and then smiled. Okay, let's talk about giving pleasure. Compared to when you were first dating, how often did she do this for you before that night? Well, I mean, for real, until the very end. Jim shook his head. I don't know. No, not very often, even before the wedding. What about all the years of your marriage after that night? On average, per year? Jim thought about it. Of course, there were times when it happened less often, but throughout the entire marriage, he probably never went more than a month without enjoying it. He frowned. And what? Maybe after being used by two of my best friends, she suddenly realized that she liked to give pleasure? It probably reminds her of that night. Because I'm a woman, damn it. Sonia answered, showing two fingers. There are two types of women. Those who love it and those who hate it. And news for you, the second type is the vast majority. If your wife was the type who loved it, you would have enjoyed it from the very first time she got a third base. The rest of us who don't love it do so only because we know how important it is for men. We hate the process, but we love seeing how happy it makes you. Judging by your reaction, your wife is trying to make you happy in this regard because she wants you to be happy. I assure you, she doesn't want to think about that night when she's with you. She's trying to forget it. Are you speaking from your own experience? Jim grinned. Yes, Sonia said, nodding. How many years will you give me? Jim shrugged. 23? 24? I'm 29, and I got married at 18. This was the dumbest decision of my life. My husband beat me, but I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid that if my father found out, he would kill him and go to prison himself. Then I only helped in the kitchen here, but during breaks, I went into the hall and watched the dancing. By the way, I'm bi. Anyway, one regular friend of my husband said he knew what I was going through and seemed so understanding. One night after closing, I got drunk and cried on his shoulder in his pickup truck. The next thing I know, I'm on top of him. We're kissing and having a night. Even though my husband was terrible, I still thought I loved the man. And for the next 3 months, I endured the beatings as if atoning for my guilt and gave him the best pleasures just to compensate for what I had done. Honestly, it was only by having intim with him that I could block that incident in my head. And the stupidest thing was that I didn't want him to find out because I was afraid he would leave. I didn't want to lose him. And what happened? Asked Jim. Sonia frowned and shrugged. That fool was so stupid that he hit me in front of my father. Now he's on the ground, and my father is sitting, and I'm running this place alone. You said your father retired? Sonia rolled her eyes. Jim, we just met. I'm not ready to tell you yet that my father is in prison for the murder of my ex-husband. Well, he was clearly that kind of guy and deserved it. I'm sorry this happened to you, but my story is completely different, Jim said, finishing his muffin and taking another sip of coffee. Yes, but it gives me the perspective you desperately need, Sonia replied, watching him carefully. Obviously, your wife means a lot to you, otherwise you wouldn't be so angry. And I'll tell you, if you are as dear to her as I think, then she is burdened with guilt for that night. She has been trying to make up for her mistake for many years. I'm sure that after hearing from Lillian that you now know the whole truth. She is probably literally beating herself up right now. Even if you cheated on her and she found out, it probably wouldn't make her any more unhappy than she feels now for hurting you so much. Jim flinched at her words. Sonia smiled. Don't worry. If you and I had something, your status still wouldn't allow it to happen. But I know you thought about it. She continued, I see that you want to see my breast to somehow distract yourself. But Jim, you need to go home and deal with this. You love your wife, and your anger is the result of the fact that what you considered ideal is crumbling. Jim shook his head. Yes, maybe I love her, but she ruined everything. No, it was a mistake, and you would never have known if it weren't for that friend from the past. Your wife probably never cheated on you after that. Think about why she tried so hard all these years. Perhaps it was because of that mistake. She wanted to prove her love to you. Jim looked at Sonia in disbelief. Are you saying that my wife is doing everything she can because she feels guilty? I'm sure that's partly true. Yes, Sonia replied, but mostly because she loves you. If she didn't love you so much, she most likely wouldn't have tried to hide it or cared the way she did all this time. She would have had plenty of opportunities to go left again, but she didn't. So, you're saying I should just close my eyes to this? Jim asked sarcastically. No, it's not like that. Sonia shook her head. You need to talk to her, find out everything, and try to forgive if you can. Because if you don't deal with it now, you will never be happy. All this horror, how can I even imagine that everything can be fixed? I've just learned that Jeff and Trisha may have been laughing at me behind my back all these years. How can I live with this? Jim clenched his fists on the table. Sonia shrugged. As for Jeff, I would completely exclude him from my life. What his wife told you about it being a mistake is most likely true, but I'm sure he was the initiator, not your wife. He was the one who started flirting with her that night. Like your friend said, I'm willing to bet that if your wife wanted to do it again, he would probably agree. But I am sure that after that night, Trisha did everything possible to prevent it from happening again. You sound like you know men you've never met, Jim chuckled. Sonia winked. So, what am I wrong about? Tell me, I've never been wrong in my guesses. Right. Contact your wife, but just cut Jeff out of your life and try to make sure your wife stays away from him too, if you want to save your marriage. Jim crossed his arms over his chest. Let me guess. If I don't go home to my wife, you won't show me your breasts? Sonia smiled. No, but here is what I can offer. Let's go to my room behind the bar. You call your wife, tell her you're okay, and that you two will talk. After that, well, maybe you'll still see them before you go home. Indignant exclamations were heard from the opposite side of the bar. Sonia shouted to the two old men, if your idiots ever pay the bill, I'll even shake it for you. The old man laughed loudly as Sonia took Jim's hand and led him into the room behind the bar. It was a small office, but neatly organized. A small desk, a computer, and a printer. Okay, call, and then if you want you can see them. Although I suppose you'll want to go home right away, she winked. Jim shrugged, turned on the phone, and saw over 70 missed calls and messages, as well as 8 voicemails. He frowned, looked at Sonia, who nodded encouragingly, and dialed the number. Oh God, Jim, forgive me. He heard Trisha's voice full of tears. Please don't leave me. I'm so guilty. I'm so sorry. I'm fine. I just needed time. I'm not able to drive, so now I'll call a taxi and go home. We'll talk, Jim answered calmly, looking at Sonia, who gave him a thumbs up as a sign of approval. What bar are you at? Brewery Louie. May and I will come, and she will drive your car home. We were really worried, Trisha said anxiously. Sure you can pick me up? I'm in. Jim looked around, trying to find something with the name of the establishment. The only thing he remembered was a sign advertising dancers, but he didn't even know the name of the place. Sonia picked up a piece of paper and showed it to Jim. I'm at Starlight Girls on the corner of Cavendish and 14th North in a nightclub. Trisha said in surprise and indignation, You didn't do anything to spite me, did you? This is a damn nightclub, not a bad place, Jim snapped. If you come, fine. If you don't come, I'll take a taxi, and maybe I won't come home today. He hung up and didn't need to look at Sonia to know that wasn't the best reaction. At that moment, he didn't care. Well, come on, show me what you've got. Sonia frowned. She reached behind her back, unfastened the hooks. She pulled the top of her bodice down, giving him a good view, the same bronze shade as her face. There was a small tattoo of a flower on one breast. Here, Sonia buttoned her bodice again and left the office. Jim followed her. Now that I'm no longer motivated to drink coffee, I'll grab some more whiskey. You can't blame her for thinking that you decided to take revenge on her. You were flirting with me and trying to see my breasts, Sonia said. And I'm sure she's still on her way. Did she sound upset after what she did? Why does she even care what I do? Jim answered bitterly. Where's my damn whiskey? I like you, Jim, and I rarely like anyone who comes here. Trust me, hold on to your coffee and focus on how wonderful your life is, Sonia said. Okay, we live in Elmwood. I think it's about a 40-minute drive to get here. If she's not here in an hour, I'll drink whiskey and take a taxi to the hotel. Sonia leaned over and whispered, If she does come, you can drink until closing, and I'll take you somewhere myself. But if she comes, no shouting, just listen to her and try to give her a chance to explain herself. Agreed, Jim whispered back. If I stay drinking until closing, I want to be able to be a gentleman, and he'll want to kiss. It doesn't matter, she'll come, Sonia answered in a normal tone, pointing to the coffee. The travel time estimate turned out to be wrong. Less than 20 minutes later, Trisha entered the club. Despite her puffy red eyes and lack of makeup, Jim thought she was incredibly beautiful. No wonder she was often told she looked like actress Amy Adams. Her piercing green eyes, long naturally curly red hair pulled back into a ponytail, a t-shirt and leggings still accentuated her slender 55 figure with size 4 breasts, which had once been size 5 before she had a reduction and a lift about 4 years ago. She was always a little shorter and caviar than Lillian, but Jim's wife always took pride in her figure and kept it in great shape. Trisha looked around with a frown and seemed to glare at Jim until he realized her gaze was directed at Sonia. "Where's May?" Jim asked coldly. "He wouldn't go into a place like this. We took the spare keys, and she will take your car home." Trisha hissed. "Is the performance over?" "Dancers are only from Thursday to Saturday. Only on weekends," Sonia answered cheerfully. "You must be Trish. You seem to need coffee, tea, or maybe juice." "Sorry, but this is not a place where I would drink anything," Trisha said in an arrogant tone. "Probably not. As far as I know, none of us girls have ever been in a group with two of our husband's friends behind his back," Sonia answered with a smile. "Did you tell her?" Trisha said in a hoarse voice, her pale face turning red. Jim glared at his wife. "Sonia is the one to whom you should be grateful that I didn't get into a taxi drunk and go to a hotel for an indefinite period of time. Be nice to her." "And how did she achieve this?" Trisha looked at the young woman with displeasure. Sonia shrugged. "I promised to show him something if he sobered up and called you. And it worked." "What?" Trisha started crying and didn't know whether to yell at Jim or Sonia. "Look, Trish, I'm sorry for being so harsh about that comment about the band, but I'm a little protective of this club," Sonia said, still smiling. It was a quick glance, more of a joke than anything serious. "Now you two definitely need to talk. You can go home and discuss this in front of your daughter, or have a drink at the house's expense here and talk in a more private setting. Your husband was upset, and I listened to him. Jim is an amazing person from what I've learned about him, but nothing was going to happen. He loves you too much. So, what do you do?" Trisha wiped away her tears. "You try to sleep with Lillian today," Jim said coldly. "She told me. I was shocked, angry, and she was the first to suggest that, as she put it, even the scores." Jim replied coldly. "But you yourself told her that I'm not interested. Do you remember?" "Vodka and orange juice, please," Trisha said sharply and sat down on the stool next to Jim. "Better double," she added. Sonia made a serious face, nodded, and brought Trisha her drink. "I think I'd better go see how the old folks are doing," she added, grabbing a couple of beers and heading towards the video lottery arcade. Trisha took a long sip of her drink, her eyes following the young woman. "Did you really convince her to show you her breasts? Doesn't seem to be your type. All those tattoos. Trish, tell me the truth. What really happened that night?" Jim looked towards the bar, nodding at his wife. "I heard two different versions. I don't think anything could be worse than the one I'm imagining right now, so tell me the truth." Trisha started crying again. "The truth is, I remember almost nothing. I got so drunk that everything was like a fog. At first, I thought it was a nightmare. It was only when Lillian found me wandering around the house looking for the toilet that I realized what it really was." "And what did you do then?" Jim said in a mock cheerful tone. Trisha burst into tears. Jim saw, out of the corner of his eye, how tears were streaming down her face. Even her nose began to run. He continued to look ahead silently, sipping his coffee. Unbeknownst to Jim, Sonia suddenly appeared in front of them and handed a clean, white napkin to Trisha. "Here you go, darling," she said softly, giving Jim a reproachful look. "Thank you," Trisha said, then turned to Jim. "Why do you need me to say that? You already know what I did. I slept with Jeff and one of his friends in his trailer. I told you I don't remember anything. I was drunk on illegal pills and high on some crap Jeff had talked me into taking. I seem to remember him kissing my body and saying, 'You agree with this?' This is going to sound really stupid, but at that moment I really thought it was you there. I swear it's true. I thought you and Jeff had in him with me that night. Everything I could see was distorted, only some spots and colors, and I decided that it was you. Do you really want me to believe that you thought I wanted to share you with Jeff?" Jim said with a grin. "Hush, let her finish," Sonia intervened. "So you were hallucinating and don't remember who was with you except Jeff?" Jim gave her a sour look for interfering again. Trisha shrugged. "I knew it was Jeff because he took my hand and led me there. He teased me because Jim sometimes took illegal substances, well, in those days, and I only smoked. I was so drunk that I wanted to prove that I was not such a bore, as he called me. I don't even know if he actually kissed me or mentioned you. He said he doesn't remember everything either, and you thought it was me?" Jim shook his head in disbelief. "At first, I thought nothing had happened at all. Damn, I had never taken such substances before, so I didn't even understand what was happening to me. Trish cried again. Then Lillian found me and helped me clean up, and I realized that it was real. I could taste it in my mouth. I remember Lillian making some remark that we were newlyweds, so I calmed down a little because even though I slept with another man, you were there too. However, I was still afraid of how Lillian would react if she found out that Jeff was with us. I tried to find Jeff, but I couldn't, so I went looking for you. I found you almost unconscious on the sofa. I asked when you got there, and several people told me that you had been sitting there drinking for several hours. Then I realized that you weren't there. The thought of sleeping with two men who were not my husband made me sick. I was terrified but afraid to be around Lillian. The Felts helped me get you into the taxi, and I'm sure you remember how I had to ask the driver to stop a couple of times so I could throw up on the way. I got to bed but couldn't sleep. My heart was beating so hard that I thought I was going to die. I didn't actually sleep until the next night. I was only pretending when you came because I couldn't face you. I was ashamed of what I had done. Jim snorted and shook his head. And what about the fact that you hid everything? How did this happen? Lillian told me that she found out Jeff had cheated on her the next morning, although he didn't mention the trailer or that it was a threesome. Can you tell me something first? Trish asked quietly, wiping away her tears. How did you know before you talked to Lillian? She didn't tell you that I asked her to sleep with me. Jim shook his head. Sonia frowned and refilled his coffee. Well, honey, do you remember Rory Dell? Trish winced. That drunken creep you forced me to include in our wedding party. He sold you substances in those days. Was he spying on us? Jim turned and looked at Trish. A faint smile flashed across his face. Trish frowned in disgust, downing her drink in large gulps, then motioned for Sonia to bring her another. That man lied. I asked Jeff who the other man was, and he said it was a friend of his from out of town, someone you, and I didn't know. So, there was supposedly no chance you'd ever find out. And when did this conversation take place? Jim asked, turning back to her. Trish ignored his question and asked her own. I slept with Rory Dell that night. He only told you about it yesterday. Jim shrugged. He's going through a 12-step program. So now he's apologizing to everyone he hurt while he was using. He deceived me. Where's his apology? Trish said with contempt. Jim chuckled. Deceived? According to him, nothing you said makes me doubt his version. You willingly went along with it. First, you gave pleasure, then had a night with them in turn, had an intim again. Sonia, Jim said sternly, this isn't helping. She was obviously in no condition to consent tonight with anyone other than her husband. No, he's right. I behaved like the last creature that night, Trish said, her voice breaking. But I thought it was you. I swear on my life I went for it and enjoyed it because I thought it was you. Trish hung her head and began to cry, while Sonia gently patted her on the shoulder. You didn't answer my question, Jim said coldly. When did you discuss what happened with my best friend? Trish fidgeted in her seat and avoided his gaze. 2 days later, when you went to the gym, I called him. I said I knew it wasn't you and demanded to know who the second man was. As you know, he lied, but he also said that Lillian knew what happened. I almost had a nervous breakdown and panicked, screaming at him and threatening to let you kill him. You know Jeff, Mr. Psychology. He calmed me down and convinced me that the best thing for everyone was that you never find out. He said the only thing I would gain by confessing was relief from my guilt, but the price would be great pain for you. He said that you would leave me and he would have no chance to restore his relationship with Lillian. Jeff said he already told Lillian that you were aware and that we were working on it. Later that week, she invited me over. I was terrified, but I had already convinced myself that by hiding the truth from you, I would save our marriage and save you from pain. This is not an excuse, but at that time I was naive and truly believed that I was doing the right thing. I lied to both you and Lillian. Jim raised his eyebrows. So when she offered to even the score by sleeping with me, you said I wouldn't do it to continue the lie? No, I just couldn't stand the thought of you ending up with her. It would kill me. She is so beautiful, slender, perfect. She still is. You would have slept together, and she would have taken you from me. You're twice as good as her husband, and she knows it. Trish cried again, hanging her head, and motioned for Sonia to give her another drink. Sonia gently touched her shoulder. Sorry, but I think you've had enough, Sonia said. You need to be clear-headed to discuss this. Excuse me, I need to clear out the old folks to get ready for closing, but you two take your time, Sonia said. Jim, are you going to leave me? Trish asked softly. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm still processing what's happening. I came to this bar to get drunk. Who would have thought that I'd find a bartender and a marriage counselor here at the same time? Jim replied, You like her in an intimate way. I noticed as soon as I walked in. Did you like looking at her? Trish said with a hint of despair. It was a quick look, and yeah, they were pretty good, but I didn't marry you because of your breasts, which are better than Sonia's and Lillian's before and after your surgery. And I won't leave you just because of breasts, Jim said. Listen, I'm still trying to wrap my head around all this. You have to understand that what happened so early in our relationship makes me rethink a lot of things that have happened since then. Okay, I guess that makes sense. Jim turned and pointed his finger at her. One thing, if I catch you in one lie, even an innocent one, I will leave and may never come back. Understood? Yes, Trish replied. What do you want to hear? I'm telling you the truth. Were protections used? No. I suspect they weren't, and they were just smart enough to pull out in time. That's why I went to the clinic and underwent a full examination. I got a vaginal infection, but there were no STDs. Jim closed his eyes and shook his head. But we continued to have unprotected intim with you the very next day, if I remember correctly. Hell, at least 5 times a week until you got your period. Trish frowned and shrugged. I already said I was young and stupid then. I know I could have infected you with something, but I didn't want you to suspect anything. Besides, I felt so bad mentally that I simply needed physical intimacy. It was only thanks to your love that I didn't end up in a mental hospital. I felt so bad inside. Well, I'm so glad I was able to help you recover from sleeping with my 2 friends, Jim said sarcastically. Jim, Sonia said reproachfully, returning to the bar counter. The establishment was now empty, and the lights were bright. Sonia shook her head. It's okay. I deserve it. I know I acted selfishly, relying on you, even though it was my own fault. Well, according to your husband, as he told me, Sonia looked straight at Jim. You didn't really suffer when she leaned on you, especially when it came to pleasure. You must make love. Trish's eyes widened, and she blushed. Oh, well, it's not for me. You don't want white lies, so I'll say it. I don't like it. I can't stand the taste. Okay, that's not entirely true. I love that you like it so much. That's why I do it, and it turns me on too, knowing that I can give you such pleasure. I think I also wanted to continue to prove to myself that I deserved such an amazing husband. Sonia raised an eyebrow and smiled slightly at Jim. He was starting to think that she was right about a lot of things, and maybe he should listen to her advice, even without bribes. But he couldn't say he regretted seeing her breasts, and Sonia didn't seem to mind showing them. Trish, I'm sure you know I have to ask this, Jim said, turning to his wife. He wanted to see her face when she answered. That night, was it the only time you cheated on me in our entire relationship, even when we were dating? Yes, definitely, Trish responded quickly. Over all these years, of course, they tried to seduce me. There was also harmless flirting, you saw it yourself. But I never kissed anyone more than on the cheek. And since we started dating, this has never happened until that night. Jim glanced at Sonia. He had a strong feeling that she would be right again. He turned to his wife, sighed, and asked the next question. I believe you. Did Jeff ever try to seduce you after that night? From the look on Trish's face, Jim knew the answer even before she nodded. He added, even when he was sober. Trish lowered her gaze and began nervously twirling the cup of coffee Sonia had placed in front of her. He was never rude or pushy. These were more hints, comments that made me understand that he wanted more. When I reminded him that I could never do this to you again, he backed down, respecting my words. When was the last time he tried? Jim asked calmly. He saw Sonia glance at him with the expression, I told you so. Trish shrugged, visibly nervous. Last month, Jim closed his eyes. Not only did my best friend sleep with my wife a few months after our wedding, but he tried to repeat it for 18 years. Please tell me what happened the last time. It was when I went to Philadelphia for a couple of days for a meeting at the headquarters, Trish said. I already said that nothing happened. Lillian was at work at the time, so Jeff and Patience came over for dinner. You probably remember, I talked about this. The girls were sitting in another room, and he helped me wash the dishes. He leaned toward me and said that I had very kissable lips and looked down, so I knew he was talking about the wrong lips. I told him I can't do this to you, not now. I'm happily married and I don't want you. Sorry, but it sounds like you were looking for an excuse for him to stop, but didn't say no, Jim said sharply. No wonder he never stopped trying. Trish started crying again, and Jim rolled his eyes. All she did from the moment she entered the club was cry, even though he was the one experiencing the pain, and she was the one who caused it. You don't understand, Trish sobbed between words. Of course, I didn't want to kiss him or anything else. He never went any further when I politely refused. So I always did it that way. I didn't let him touch me in a way that he wouldn't touch you. He was your friend, and I was afraid that if I angered him, he would destroy our marriage without hurting himself. His marriage was different from ours, as I thought you knew. He and Lillian allowed each other to sleep with other people. Did you hear this from his wife? That she is not against his cheating? Sonia intervened. Not directly, but Lillian wanted to sleep with Jim. She hinted at it when she called me tonight. And I know she sleeps with doctors at her job, Trish stammered. Jeff told me, and there were rumors many years ago. Sonia frowned and shook her head. Honey, he was just using you. And I tried to warn you all these years. Well done for not giving in a second time, but he's a serial cheater. And if Lillian ever had a fleeting relationship, it was most likely an attempt to take revenge for his infidelities. I bet it was a long time ago. Either she's in complete denial, or she's just resigned herself to who he really is. Trish, if you and I have any chance of saving our marriage, Jim said firmly, you have to promise me that you will never have anything to do with Jeff again, or with Lillian either, as long as they stay together. What? But nothing has happened since that night. He's your best friend, our daughters are best friends, and are going to live in the dorm together, Trish said with surprise. A best friend doesn't try to seduce his friend's wife over and over again, Jim replied. I know it will be awkward, but it's necessary. And Maeve needs to know why. Trish's eyes widened. What? No, you can't let her know what I did. She will never forgive me. She'll think I'm some terrible, easy-to-get woman. How old is she now? Sonia asked. 17, Jim answered, soon 18. Sonia rolled her eyes. She's almost an adult, and I'm guessing about the same age as you when it happened. She knows how everything works. Besides, Jim is right. She needs to know why you're going to cut your best friend's parents out of your life, and why there will be difficult times ahead. You don't want her to jump to conclusions and choose sides. How did you explain Jim's disappearance to her this evening? Trish shrugged. She said it was some kind of midlife crisis. Sonia made a face full of disappointment and put her hand to her forehead. Was he at my club? You just told your daughter that Jim is cheating on you. I'm sure she's a little resentful of her dad. Do you also want to feel guilty for ruining their relationship? She will be ashamed of me if she finds out. Ma will hate me, and he'll lose her, like I'll lose you, Trish said, sobbing. Jim touched her hand. Trish raised her head, surprised by his touch, and looked at him. Maeve is a smart girl. She'll probably be angry and a little disappointed, but she's really smart, and she'll want to support us, Jim said. And you really need her support. And you need to keep your daughter away from someone like Jeff, Sonia added. Oh, Jeff would never. Jim began, but then stopped short, remembering that just 24 hours ago, he had no idea Jeff was stalking Trish. He also remembered how Sonia had been right about everything from the very beginning. He made comments and looked at her, especially when she was in a swimsuit. Trish admitted, you're right. She needs to know. I'll call Jeff, and you talk to Lillian. And please don't tell Ma I told you this, but she and Patience are more than friends. Jim nodded. He suspected this, but didn't bother asking questions. He didn't feel comfortable thinking about his daughter dating anyone, be it a guy or a girl. But in the end, all that mattered to him was her happiness. I'm sure Jeff and Lillian both know this. Maeve keeps saying that she'll tell you when she's ready. I told her you don't care as long as she's happy, but it will really put a strain on their relationship, Trish added. Maybe I should tell her that I already found out, and that you're right, that I really don't care and just want her to be happy, Jim said thoughtfully. Bad idea. You might scare her, Sonia intervened. You don't seem like the type to make scenes at home about orientation, but it's better to show it through actions. Offer comments on stories or news about people being judged for their intimacy and express your opinion against it. Show that you will not only accept her, but are also ready to stand up for her. As soon as she feels that she will not lose her protective dad, she will tell you everything herself. Excuse me, but who are you? Trish asked suspiciously, raising an eyebrow. A simple barmaid who decided to save all the problems of my family after showing my husband her breasts, Sonia replied. She's the club manager, Jim said with a grin. Sonia laughed and shrugged with a wide grin. I'm just a woman who runs this place, who has a lot of life experience and knows how to read people because of that experience. And yes, I love showing my body to good people that I really like Jimmy here. I'm also partial to hopeless cases, like, for example, your husband, who came here with the air of a man who has lost everything that is dear to him in this world. I assumed it was you. You're exaggerating, Jim said, but he wasn't entirely sure of his words. I indulged his complaints a little for a few hours, but I also found out a few things about him. Sonia continued, looking at Trish. In general, besides the fact that he is quite handsome for a grown man, I learned that Jim is a wonderful guy who found himself in a very unpleasant situation. I even thought about sleeping with him, although I don't usually get involved with married men unless they're leaving a bad marriage. But as I learned more, I realized that he still loves you too much, and I decided to give your marriage a chance. At some point, yes, but he looked at them like a picture on the wall or like a scene in a movie. That's when I realized for sure that I had no chance of anything more than a one-time romance, even if he left you. But I don't need it. Jimmy is the kind of man you can fall in love with and marry. Well, I'm very glad you didn't sleep with my husband and decided to interfere in our lives, Trish said, taking out her phone. Jim is sober enough to drive now. Don't worry about a taxi. Sonia waved her hand dismissively. I'm sure he is. Sonia, can I take your number? I'd like to invite you to dinner to say thank you, Trish said, emphasizing the last words and smiling. Sonia seemed to flinch, as if Trish had lunged at her. Trish, it's my pleasure, but like I said, Jim is the kind of person I could really fall in love with. The three of us shouldn't have a night, and I don't think it will help your marriage. I didn't mean it like that, Jim said with a nervous laugh, then looked at his wife. Trish, I think I promised not to lie. Trish smiled and shook her head. A small part of me actually considered that option for a second, to even the score by allowing Jim to have a threesome. And you are very beautiful, but I already know that this will not solve anything. It will only complicate the situation, especially now. Besides, like Lillian, Jim might fall in love with you and leave me. No, I'm only offering dinner and maybe some friendship. Maybe you can give us some more advice while we work on our relationship. Sonia took Trish's phone and dialed her number. I really don't have many friends, especially those who accept my profession, but the main advice is to do what Jim said and find a good psychologist. And Jim, stay away from Jeff. It will be difficult to work on your relationship when you end up in jail for fighting. And forget about the threesome, Jimmy. You're not that type. This is the first thing you've been wrong about since I came here, Jim said, winking at his wife. Trish laughed. They both smiled at each other. Sonia looked slightly puzzled. When Trish stopped laughing, she said, I'm sorry, but my senior year of high school, my best friend and I went to a frat party. She and I seduced Jim and had a threesome at the party. After that, they both tried to get him, but Jim chose me. And from then on, we started dating. Jim shrugged and smiled. But that was the only time, right? Sonia asked in bewilderment. And you're not looking for another threesome, judging by Jim's reaction when you said you might be interested? Then both Trish and Jim started laughing. You scoundrels, this is not true. Is it? Were you just making fun of me? Sonia asked, joining their laughter. Sorry, you were right about everything you said, and it was starting to get annoying, so I wanted to see what it would be like if you were wrong. Even once, Sonia said, pointing her finger at them. You see, both of you didn't say a word, but together, you made up this story to deceive me. If that's not a sign that you're soulmates, I don't know what is. Now, get out of my establishment so I can close it down. Keep me posted. I want to know what you come up with. Be sure to invite me to dinner and tell me everything. By the way, I'll even help you cook something. When they left the club together, they were still laughing at the way they had played with Sonia. How did you understand that I would want to make fun of her? Jim whispered in his wife's ear as they walked toward the exit. Are you kidding? She's right. When it comes to intimate, you're all about the attention on me, and you only have eyes for me, Trish responded. So I'm boring and vanilla in bed? Jim asked, narrowing his eyes. What other vanilla guy would let me please you on the way home? Trish laughed. Jim, you're not boring or vanilla, but you're a romantic. Even when you have a night with me like it's the last time, you still make me feel like we're making love, and I love that about you. You're the only person I ever wanted to be with, and I want to show you how much you mean to me. After a restless night, due to their conversation at Sonia's club, Jim and Trish both took the next day off. They devoted time to finding a family psychologist and drawing up preliminary rules that they would follow in the future. It was obvious that most of them, such as not drinking alcohol alone or not being alone with members of the opposite intim in the house, were about trust that Jim needed to rebuild. But he didn't want to ask Trish to do something that he wasn't ready to do. After intense discussion, Jim and Trish were able to reach a compromise on the rules, although there were some initial difficulties. For example, a discussion about how Trish would no longer go out with her friends to bars for a few drinks resulted in a heated argument. At one point, to even things out, Trish even offered Jim a free pass, the opportunity to cheat on her once, as long as it wasn't Lillian or Sonia. Jim, of course, refused, and eventually, the tension between them settled back into a calm discussion. Although Trish agreed to stop communicating with Jeff and Lillian, she insisted that she must call Jeff first so that he wouldn't be caught off guard when Lillian learned all the details. Jim wanted Lillian to know the whole truth as soon as possible and even wanted to be present during the conversation with Jeff. However, Trish refused to put the call on speakerphone because she didn't trust Jim, fearing that he might lose his temper and say something in a fit of anger. Hey Jeff, this is Trish. Trish began cheerfully, although she looked very tense. Yes, Jim has returned home. Listen, I told him everything. Absolutely everything. She paused as she listened to his answer, taking a deep breath before continuing. No, this is a bad idea. Don't come. Look, Jeff, I've been thinking a lot about that night these past few days. No, that's not why. Can you please just tell me the truth? That night, all you did was try to convince me to go to the trailer with you, so we could have a night. I know you didn't take the pills you gave me. That thing kept me up all day, and you fell asleep right away that night. Did you give me the pill on purpose to seduce me? Jim watched as Trish's face turned red, her expression becoming increasingly angry, and her eyes filled with tears. She seemed to be barely holding back her emotions. No, Trish said sharply. This definitely wasn't what I wanted that night, and you know that very well. I thought it was as much a mistake for you as it was for me, but now it's clear that you planned it. How can you not understand that I told you no 100 times? Yes, I was afraid you would tell my husband, and that's the only reason I didn't punch you the last time you tried to kiss me. Well, screw you, Jeff. I can't believe it took me this long to see you for who you really are. You will no longer be welcome in our home, and we want nothing to do with you. Oh yeah, and since you and Lillian have such an open marriage arrangement, I'll let Jim spend the day in bed with her as soon as she's free. Maybe I'll even record it on video so you can watch. I'll call her now. It's the least I can do for Jim after all this. Goodbye forever, stupid. As soon as she hung up, tears began to flow from her eyes, and Jim immediately came over to hug her. Through her tears, Trish whispered, he said that I had been giving him signals the whole time and that he was just giving me a chance to do what I really wanted. But I never wanted him. Never. He called me a flirt and said that as soon as you divorce me, because I'm a girl of easy virtue, I'll call him to sleep with him again. He's lying, Jim answered softly, although everything was boiling inside him, and he was ready to get in the car and go after Jeff. We're done with him, Trish cried, clinging to his chest. We're done with him, she repeated. Jim tried to calm her down, but thoughts of revenge against his former best friend were running through his mind. I think I'd better invite Lillian. No, I wasn't serious, Trish said in horror, her eyes wide. I said that just to hurt him. Jim kissed her forehead. I know. Don't worry. But we agreed that we would tell Lillian everything together, right? Trish nodded, and Jim picked up his phone to call Lillian. About 20 minutes later, Lillian arrived at their house, looking nervous. Her usually flawless makeup was missing, and her hair was still damp. Jim opened the door to let her in. Lillian, is Trish here too? Lillian asked, looking worried. Jeff just texted me saying that if I sleep with you, he will kick me out of the house forever. I didn't tell him what you told me yesterday, only that you know everything. Jim sighed. Coméine, Lille. Trish is waiting in the living room. We need to talk. Lillian walked into the house and sat down on the couch across from Trish. Jim sat down next to his wife and took her hand. So, you two are still trying to figure it out. That's a good sign, Lillian said, still looking a little worried. Lil, I just told Jeff that Jim will have an intimate with you all day, Trish blurted out. What are you talking about? Lillian exclaimed, both surprised and angry. Jim raised his hand to calm her down. Please wait. Let her explain. I'm sorry, but there's something important you need to know, Trish said, crossing her arms and nodding. First of all, you know that Jeff and I lied to you about Jim knowing about that New Year's Eve. I'm sorry, as I said yesterday, but that wasn't the only lie. Trish took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. What Jim heard from Rory was absolutely true. Although I didn't know until last night that he was the second man in the trailer, I was very drunk, and Jeff talked me into taking some pills. After that, he gave me some kind of pill. Once it took effect, Jeff convinced me that my husband was there with us, and that I was having a night with him and another man, whom I assumed was Jim. I was hallucinating, couldn't think clearly, and was completely swayed by it, thinking it was an intimate experience with Jim and Jeff. It felt like some kind of weird dream. I didn't realize it wasn't Jim until you helped me clean up and I went downstairs. Your husband just admitted to me that he deliberately brought me to the trailer with the intention of using pills to seduce me. He's made several attempts to seduce me again over the years, claiming that you and he have an open marriage and that you don't mind. According to him, you also sleep with other men, so it didn't matter. Damn it, I don't sleep with other men. It happened once, before our wedding, just to take revenge for that New Year's Eve. And he knows it very well, Lillian answered indignantly. So, you knew all these years that he was flirting with you and didn't tell me anything? Trish replied with a sigh. I thought I found a way to stop him without ruining our friendship. Trish answered. I understand that I was wrong, but you needed to know the truth. Jim and I are trying to repair our relationship, and you need to think about your future. Your husband tried, but I always stopped him, Trish added softly. She was completely honest about everything, and I was there when she talked to your husband, my former friend. And if you're wondering, yes, she did say something to him like, since you and Lillian are in an open relationship, then Jim can sleep with Lillian all day. Trish, I thought we were friends. Why haven't you ever asked me how open our marriage is? Lillian said reproachfully, getting to her feet. Okay, if so, I'm ready. Let's go, Jim. Jim raised his hand to stop her. No, I'm sorry, but that's not why we asked you to come. Trish said that to Jeff just to get under his skin. I have no intention of cheating on my wife because of what happened almost 20 years ago. However, I am determined to keep this scumbag who tried to seduce my wife just a month ago as far away from my family as possible. Next time I see Jeff, I'll probably knock out a couple of his teeth. And you want me to give him this message? Sorry, but I don't think I want to talk to him. Luckily, I have work until late tonight, so we won't run into each other. Trish sighed. No, I already told him everything. We wanted to tell you the truth, and that we are going to see a family psychologist to try to improve our relationship. Because of Maeve and Patience, our daughter will always be a welcome guest in our home. But if you stay with Jeff, I'm sorry, but we can't be friends. Are you saying that if I don't leave my husband, our friendship will end? Lillian said in disbelief, shaking her head. This is a little hypocritical, don't you think? This is not an ultimatum, Jim interjected. We can't deal with Jeff now if we want to have any chance of repairing our relationship. We just don't see how we can maintain a friendship with you without contacting him. We're saying it's about Jeff, not you. And if he's not around, we'd love to be in a relationship with you. Lillian crossed her arms, paused for a moment, and said, Now I understand. All these years, you told Jeff how you cheated on me. What you said about cheating only once was a lie, right? He was with other women, and all this time, he tried to hide it from me just as I did from him. I turned a blind eye to all these signs for so long. Trish nodded. Lillian's face tensed, and she took a deep breath before nodding. Jim, did he ever tell you that he had mistresses? Lillian asked. Jim shook his head and looked at his wife. Jeff never mentioned cheating in front of me. He told me this many times over the years when we were alone, Trish replied. But most often, this happened after he hinted at me. I stopped right away, but somehow He always started talking about it again. So, you were always aware that he never stopped flirting? Lillian said through clenched teeth, and anger appeared on her face. I must have been really blind. If I had at least suspected something, then perhaps we wouldn't have come to this. Damn, this man manipulated you. Trish, I understand that you wanted to save the marriage and protect it, but you were simply used, and it was not your fault. I'm going to find out before it's too late. Trish and Jim hugged Lillian goodbye, and she walked away looking determined and thoughtful. Jim looked at his wife with relief, knowing that the most difficult test, at least for her, was still ahead, the conversation with Maeve. While they were waiting for Maeve to return from school, Trish made lasagna for dinner, which was their favorite dish. While his wife was cooking, Jim found something to do in the yard, doing small tasks so as not to think about the upcoming conversation. He received a message from Trish asking him to return to the house to wait for Maeve with her. Judging by the clock, their daughter was supposed to be back any minute. Jim was sitting at the kitchen table next to Trish when Maeve walked into the house with a worried look on her face. Even with her short, red-dyed hair, Maeve was almost an exact replica of Trish in her youth. Jim was so glad that she was more like her mother than he was, but her stubbornness and strong character were clearly his traits, the best aspects of both parents. "What's happening, Ma?" Maeve asked, starting to unload the lunchbox at the sink. "You were so nervous, Mom. Have you forgiven him? Please tell me it's not as bad as I thought. Just a dance and nothing more, right?" "Maeve, I haven't forgiven your father because there's nothing to forgive," Trish answered with a trembling voice, trying to remain calm. Jim saw that her hand under the table was shaking from nerves. "Please sit down. I need to tell you something. It's my fault, not your father's." Maeve sat down opposite her parents, looking first at her father, then at her mother. "Okay, what's going on? You know how Dad and I always tell you to stay away from illegal substances? We're not just saying that because we're overprotective of you," Trish said, squeezing Jim's hand under the table. "When we were younger, around your age, both your father and I made a lot of mistakes that we really regret. We told you this because we wanted to protect you from the same mistakes we made. I learned the hard way that, in addition to dying, you can also lose control and do things you regret later. About 18 years ago, I allowed myself to become so insane from alcohol and substances at a party that I cheated on your father with 2 men at the same time." "What the hell?" Maeve exclaimed, her mouth opening wide. This was the first time Jim had heard her swear in front of them since he was 10. Trish's eyes filled with tears, and she shrugged. "I was so out of it that I didn't realize what I was doing, and I didn't know I wasn't with your father until it was too late. I was so ashamed and scared of losing your father, whom I love with all my heart, that I hid the truth and focused on being the best wife in the world, never wanting to be in a situation where I could lose control again. Yesterday, one of the men I was with confessed to your father. That's why he didn't come home last night. We both had a heart-to-heart talk with the help of a friend. It will be difficult for all of us, but your father agreed to try to save our relationship." Maeve grabbed her head with both hands, looking stunned. "I don't know what to say." "That's not the whole story," Jim said, looking at Trish. Trish frowned and couldn't look her daughter in the eyes. "The second man I was with was Patience's father, Jeff, who specifically gave me substances to sleep with me. Throughout almost our entire married life, he tried to seduce me again. I rejected him every time, not even allowing a friendly kiss on the cheek or anything like that. But I tolerated his advances because I was afraid that your father would find out what I had done in order for our marriage to continue. We can no longer have anything to do with Jeff. He will no longer be a guest in our house." "What?" Maeve screamed, jumping to her feet and crying like her mother. "You slept with Patience's father? You're an easy girl. I can't believe it." She ran away, and a few seconds later, her bedroom door slammed shut. "Everything went great," Trish said, wiping tears from her face. Jim patted her on the shoulder. "She'll get through this." We needed to tell her the truth. Maeve stayed in her room and didn't even come out for dinner. Jim tried to talk to her several times, but she only told him to leave. Only at 9 p.m. did the door of her room open, and Maeve came out. When Trish tried to hug her, Maeve gave her mother a cold look. Trish frowned and walked away. "Dad," Maeve said coldly, "I advise you to divorce your wife. considering that I personally saw her flirt with Jeff several times. Most recently a month ago while you were away. Even Patience noticed, but I thought it was harmless since you were all close friends. Obviously, this is not the case. Oh yeah, and tell her she ruined everything. Patience's father won't let her move in with me at college. He said that none of his daughters would live with a guy whose mother is a flirty. Jim stood up and raised his voice. Maeve, you have no right to talk to your mother like that. She's still your mother. Maeve screamed. She's not my mother. She's the donor of my womb after she ruined my life. When Jim hugged her, she tried to pull away, but soon she hugged him back and began to cry. I love her, Dad. I mean, romantic love. I want to marry her and be with her forever. Now I'm going to lose her because of my mom. I know, honey. I know. Jim continued to hug his daughter until Trish left the room. Maeve sobbed. How can you be with her after what she did to you? Because it's been a long time, and I love her, Jim said softly. It was your friend, my ex-friend, who was stalking your mom, not the other way around. I believe it when your mother says she allowed the flirting because she was afraid he would tell me everything if she pushed him away too harshly. I heard it in person when Jeff and your mom were talking. It doesn't matter, though. He won't let me see Patience again. He threatened to take her out of school if she didn't promise to avoid me. He works at our school, and he doesn't joke. Jim let go of Maeve and wiped a tear from her cheek, smiling. Whatever happens, we'll get through it. But you know that your mother loves you. Perhaps even more than me. I know you're angry right now, but we need to be strong and work together to get through this. Your mother will need your support and strength because we will most likely face difficult times ahead. Jim, can you help me clean up some things in the guest bedroom? Trish called. There will be guests arriving this evening who will probably stay with us for a long time. Guests? With everything going on, Jim didn't really want their relatives to come over. Trish smiled at him uncertainly. Lillian and Patience have permanently moved out of their home and need a place to stay. The reason Jeff said these nasty things to Patience is because Lillian said she would file for divorce as soon as Patience left for college. Of course, this was before her mother had a chance to talk to her. Lillian found out that, besides me, Jeff had several other women on the side. I told Lillian what Jeff told their daughter, and she decided not to wait. She left work early and left immediately. I also asked Lillian, before she left, to tell that man that if he calls my daughter bad words, I will come with a knife and make him a eunuch. Maeve ran up to her mother and hugged her. Jim smiled as he looked at them. No one said anything, but he knew they would get through this, and he hoped he could too. Jim knew he had to stay out of the kitchen while the Thanksgiving meal was being prepared. He also knew that this event was important to her, since Maeve was returning home for the first time since she and Patience moved into an apartment together in Philadelphia for college. Patience would certainly join her. Lillian was originally scheduled to be there as well, but at the last minute, she decided to spend Thanksgiving with her boyfriend of 4 months and his children. The next day, Patience and Maeve had lunch with them and met for the first time. When Jim talked to the girls a week ago, they both joked that they had gained 20 pounds from eating 2 large turkey dinners in one weekend. Jim was pleasantly surprised that it had come to this. The initial honeymoon phase, where they stayed together to get over Trish's infidelity and deceit, ended shortly after Lillian and Patience stayed with them. The day after they left, Trish woke him up in the middle of the night to make love, but he turned her down. They needed more help, or the marriage would end. At first, consultation seemed like all sorts of touchy-feely nonsense to him. The "how are you feeling?" question was patronizing. To 2 of his friends, how must he feel? If it weren't for the fact that he really loved Trish and wanted to try to overcome everything, he wouldn't have returned after the first session. He wasn't sure if it was brainwashing through repetition or if the consultant wasn't as ignorant as he'd once thought, but the feeling mumbling mess was starting to make sense. So it was about less obvious things, like when he felt distant or why it was sometimes important for Trish to get closeness from him. He was working on trusting her again, and she needed confirmation to get over the self-loathing for what she had done. The situation became easier after Lillian found her own apartment and the girls moved to spend the summer in the city where they attended college. Jim found that he and Trish were both holding things back to avoid making a scene in front of the others. Also, Trish never admitted, until Lillian left, that every time Jim refused to have a night with her, she worried that he would end up in bed with Lillian across the hall instead. Since the house was empty, each of their problems was dealt with as soon as they arose, and Jim was more comfortable showing physical affection outside the bedroom. In fact, Jim not only didn't mind, but actually enjoyed it immensely when Trish surprised him this morning by going under the kitchen table. He decided to return the favor during dinner while she was still wearing her skirt from work. After 6 months of counseling and a lot of support from his friend, Jim almost never thought about what Trish did with Rory and Jeff. When he did, he discovered that he didn't trust his wife for whatever reason. Jim now had tools he could use to make sure he didn't allow her to create a wedge between them. There were still bad days, and in between there were occasional breakdowns. However, they were in the minority, and neither of them was angry with the other for more than a few hours. It was usually fantastic make-up intimate. Jim was extremely glad that things had changed and hoped that recent events were another sign that his marriage was indeed in good shape. Jim also let go of his hostile feelings toward his former best friend, although he probably wouldn't have slowed down too much if Jeff had crossed the street in front of him. Trisha looked a little nervous as she sat at the table, waiting for Maeve and Patience. Everything had been ready for 20 minutes, but the girls were delayed due to an accident on the highway. Suddenly, Trisha's face lit up with a smile, and she stood up. "They've arrived!" she exclaimed. Jim and Trisha walked to the door to greet the girls, taking turns giving them a big hug. Patience looked more like her father, almost as tall as Jim, but she was still very beautiful. Both girls looked like they had lost a little weight, but they were otherwise healthy and happy. They all headed to the dining room together, but Maeve suddenly froze and seemed a little embarrassed when she saw a woman in a beautiful dress with long sleeves at the table. Hello," Maeve said slowly, approaching the chair next to the woman and glancing at her parents. "Maeve, this is our good friend Sonia," Trisha announced with a smile. "And Sonia, this is our only daughter, Maeve, and our future daughter-in-law, Patience." Sonia smiled and extended her hand to Maeve as she sat down next to her. "It's very nice to meet you. You're definitely Daddy's girl. You and your fiancé are both very beautiful, and I heard you're both really smart." Maeve smiled back, but her gaze kept returning to her parents, expressing some bewilderment. Jim sat down next to Trisha and looked around the table. With the exception of the absent Lillian, all the most important people in his life were at this table. However, he noticed that his daughter looked embarrassed. He and Trisha had been hesitant about telling her about their new friend, but after discussing it a few weeks ago, it had started to seem silly. Jim knew this conversation could get awkward. "Sonia has become a dear friend to both your mother and me," he said with a smile, raising his glass of wine toward the young woman. "She's actually the reason we remain happily married." Sonia blushed slightly, which was unusual for her. She waved her hand. "No, you two are wonderful people who are madly in love with each other. That's why you're still together." I just showed my breast to Jimmy one time and gave him some friendly advice. At the last remark, everyone except Maeve laughed, although Jim laughed a little awkwardly. "When I picked up your father that night," Trisha began, "it was Sonia who had to thank for the fact that he decided to talk, and also for the fact that we both finally started to think with our heads and remembered what was most important to us. And don't worry, she showed her breast to me too," Trisha winked. Jim's eyes widened as he tried to give his wife a look that meant this is too much. Patience looked around at everyone, then her eyes widened, and she exclaimed, "Wow, so what are you three?" Maeve turned sharply to her girlfriend. "What?" Well, as a couple, there are only 3 people in a relationship." Jim felt uneasy and noticed that his wife was blushing. "No, Patience, we're just close friends." "Wow." Maeve closed her eyes and shook her head, then looked at her father defiantly. "You slept with her dad, didn't you? How could you do this to your mother? Is this revenge for her betrayal?" "Actually, I started it all," Trisha said quietly, looking from Jim to Sonia. Jim couldn't help but remember that evening that had happened just a week ago. As had become customary, they invited Sonia over for dinner and drinks afterward. Despite the age difference, the couple got along well with the young woman, who very quickly became one of their closest friends. Sonia had an old soul for her age and seemed to enjoy their company as much as they enjoyed hers. This evening was to be a special one. as Jim and Trisha had planned a big announcement that they knew would change their young friend's life. Jim wore jeans and a cute polo, while Trisha looked stunning in tight leggings and a knit sweater. Jim noticed that she wasn't wearing any underwear and was looking forward to the night, hoping for some wild night as soon as Sonia left. Sonia arrived in her usual faded jeans and a t-shirt with a band's logo, her hair in a ponytail. They were sitting in the basement having drinks when Jim finally decided to talk. He drank several bottles of beer, and the women were already on their second bottle of wine, so no one felt constrained. Earlier, Sonia even went outside to smoke, and Jim was sure it wasn't tobacco at all. Jim and Trisha were sitting together on the couch, and Sonia was opposite them. "Sonia, Trisha, and I actually had an ulterior motive in inviting you today," Jim said, noticing his wife's wide smile. "Today, we're signing documents, and tomorrow afternoon, we'll all go to the city together to sign the papers. The establishment is now ours." Sonia's eyes widened, and it seemed that she was about to cry. "Are you kidding me, Jimmy? Is this for real? We're officially business partners now." Jim smiled broadly, as did Trisha. "It seems like you're stuck with us for a long time," he said. Sonia jumped up, half sitting on Jim's lap, and hugged him tightly, pressing her head against his shoulder and whispering, Thank you. I still can't believe it." Trisha touched Sonia's hand. "Hey, what about me? Jim and I are equal partners, you know." Sonia turned around, finding herself sandwiched between them on the sofa, and hugged Trisha. Trisha put her arm around Sonia's waist with one arm and around her shoulder with the other. Jim watched in shock as Trisha closed her eyes and gently kissed Sonia on the lips. Sonia froze for a moment, and Trisha opened her eyes and looked at Jim. He knew that look. It was the one that asked, "Is this normal?" She waited for his reaction. When Jim didn't react, Trisha closed her eyes again and kissed Sonia. This time, Sonia kissed back, and their kiss became more passionate. Without breaking the kiss, Trisha took Sonia's hand and placed it on her chest, beginning to pull up her t-shirt. A few moments later, the red cotton bra was on the floor, and Sonia purred contentedly as Trisha began to caress her breasts. Jim was still in shock, but at the same time incredibly excited. He could not believe that this was really happening and not just a fantasy. Trisha pulled off her sweater and kissed Sonia again, pressing her bare chest against Sonia's. Jim still thought it might be some kind of prank and expected the women to laugh and say, "Gotcha," but this did not happen. Trisha broke the kiss and, looking at Sonia with a commanding but passionate voice that Jim only heard in the bedroom, said, "Take off those jeans." Trisha and Sonia stood opposite each other, tension mixed with mischief and laughter between them. Jim, watching them, felt his heart beat faster from the atmosphere in the room. Sonia, smiling at Trisha, said with a slight challenge, "It seems that today we can try something new." Trisha nodded, laughing as she took off her leggings. "Well, Jim, are you ready for this?" Somewhat confused, Jim took a step forward, watching as the two women exchanged glances. "Let's try to play a game," Sonia suggested, looking at Jim and lightly patting him on the shoulder. "Only this time, without the usual rules. We'll just have fun together." She looked at Trisha, who nodded and began to laugh. The laughter and light banter created an atmosphere in which all three of them felt at ease and free, allowing themselves to relax and simply enjoy the moment. They remained motionless for several moments, enjoying the aftertaste and heavy breathing. "Incredible," Sonia whispered, looking at both of them. Trisha stroked her hair and whispered back, "You were beautiful." She looked at Jim and added, "And you were incredible. We did it together, as one." Jim smiled and felt a surprising sense that the three of them had shared this moment. Trisha got up from the sofa, took Sonia's hand, and pulled her toward the bedroom. "Time to call it a night for real," she said with a smile. Jim followed them into the bedroom, where another night of pleasure awaited them, filled with laughter, affection, and a sense of togetherness. Returning to reality, Jim noticed that Maeve, sitting opposite at the dinner table, was grimacing with displeasure and wincing with embarrassment. Sonia took a deep breath and blushed slightly. "Listen, this only happened once. I won't lie. Alcohol played a role. Trisha started it all, but all three of us agreed completely. It wasn't revenge or anything like that. It was an intimate moment between friends. It was a special experience for me, and I don't regret anything. But to be honest, I wasn't planning to ever discuss this with your parents again, so as not to create awkwardness. I apologize that this happened. Maeve reached out and gently touched Sonia's hand. Everything's fine. Everything about my parents and intimate is always awkward, but I'm glad they're happy again. So happy that I haven't seen them this way in many years. If you're involved in this, then I am very grateful to you. Let's just eat and not say the word threesome in this house again, Maeve said, causing everyone to laugh. Jim smiled, looking at his family and then at Sonia. Deep down, he knew that Trisha was right. If it weren't for Sonia, he might have done something he would have regretted, and he probably wouldn't be happily married now. Or maybe he would have ended up in jail for beating up Jeff. However, was this a one-time occurrence, or something worth repeating in the future? This was a matter that he and Trisha had to discuss with Sonia. But for Jim, the main thing now was to save his marriage and friendship with Sonia, even if it meant giving up new fantasies. After dinner and the pumpkin pie had been served, Maeve looked at her mother and said, "Mom, you've outdone yourself this year. The potatoes, the filling, and this pie are incredible. You always make amazing dinners, but this one is on the next level. I'm glad you liked it, but to be honest, I didn't cook everything myself," Trisha said with a smile and winked at Jim. "Dad." Maeve looked at her father incredulously, knowing that he rarely cooks, not even on the grill. "Actually, your mom did most of the cooking," Sonia laughed. "I just helped her, and I added something of my own." "Sonia didn't actually work at the place your mom and I were talking about," Jim said. "She ran it. Technically, her father was the owner." "So, you ran a nightclub?" Maeve asked, her face showing no condemnation, only interest. "Cool. Actually, I controlled it," Sonia replied, smiling. "But the club has now been sold and is being run by new owners." She looked at Jim with a slight raise of her eyebrows. "Yeah, another reason we wanted to introduce you to Sonia is because we're business partners now," Jim said. "The three of us and Sonia's father are now equal co-owners of a restaurant that will open in a few months. Your mom and I will just be silent partners, but your mom will most likely want to contribute to the menu. Sonia will manage everything related to day-to-day operations." "Oh my God, that sounds amazing," Maeve exclaimed. "What kind of restaurant will it be? What's it called?" Sonia smiled widely and shrugged. "There will be a little bit of everything on the menu. I describe it as fine dining without the snobbery and overpriced food. The title is kind of an inside joke about what brought your parents into my life. And believe me, I think they changed my life just as much as I changed theirs. We called it the 9th Step because it's on 9th Street Southeast. Original and simple. I like it," Maeve answered with a smile, glancing at her parents. Jim looked around the table and couldn't help but think that he was happier than ever. He found it hard to believe that he owed everything to Rory Dell's confession of cheating with his wife. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you. And go ahead and listen to the next story, The Voice from the TV continued. Because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about it. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.